Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK week number 14 overview and analysis video in the summer split. We are rapidly approaching playoffs in basically every region, but the LCK is still trucking on in its regular season. I know it feels like a bit of a pace breaker talking about NACL playoffs and LTA playoffs, and LPL is even coming up on theirs, and LEC is in their final, regular season week, like all of this stuff, but the LCK very much sticking to that regular season, sticking to its group stage, and we still have quite a bit to talk about in terms of who might be qualifying this week. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from this week? Did you get surprised by any outcomes, by any of the results from any of the teams, or did everything kind of live up to your expectations? Of course, I'll be going over my thoughts and opinions throughout everything, because if you are new here, what we're going to be doing is going series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We'll be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10 at the end of the video, as we do every single week, but most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our first day of action. As is typical here with the LCK, we kick off the week with a matchup that is fun for the complete wrong reasons. We go down to the Rise group as we see potentially a matchup of the two worst teams in the LCK, DRX taking on the DN Freecs, and DRX is going to pick up a 2-0 victory here, and boy did they need this. This team has looked like absolute garbage over the course of the past couple of weeks. Truly, they have looked like the worst team in the LCK. DNF at least has shown, signs of life, I would say, over the past couple of weeks, and so for DRX to come out here and win this, I actually think this is kind of an important outcome for them, because I don't think it was guaranteed that they weren't a bottom 1 team in terms of actual form, with DNF at least starting to show again some life in terms of their recent performances. Unfortunately, that life was not there in this series. Now, life was there, and he was playing really aggro, and it was not working out for DNF, but a lot of that aggressive, nature, like trying to get back into it, feeling mentally rejuvenated, like that version of DNF just was not here for this series. I think a lot of that ends up coming down to multiple players needing to step up, and one player in particular just looked so mentally checked out that it's almost impossible to try and evaluate it. So we'll go ahead and get into it, but starting on the DRX side, player of the series for me is going to go to Rich in the top lane. This was not a difficult decision. He really dominated throughout a lot of this series. I think Dudu was excellent, especially in the 1v1, but Rich in team fights is absolutely massive. And I'm going to say something that I often don't really say on this channel, not that I think it's like all that rare, but rather it's just not really noteworthy to bring up. Rich has been exactly as advertised. Like, this guy is literally exactly what we thought he was going to be coming over to DRX. And you know what? In comparison to some other players that, came back over to the LCK, that's fine. Like, you can't even really be all that upset by that kind of outcome. He's a laner that's going to be pretty underwhelming. He's not very good in the 1v1s, although at times against certain players, he can look, decently competent in that role. But for the most part, you brought him in because he's a very good team fighter, because he's somebody that is going to elevate the team in 5v5s and can take over in that stage of the game so long as he can go neutral early, and that's exactly what he's been. He was not very good in lane in this series. Dudu was definitely better in terms of being able to generate leads, especially on the Scion in game 2, but Rich was taking over in the 5v5s. The gigantic Mbessa ult at the end of the game here in game number 2 that really sealed things for DRX. DNF was supposed to win this game. They just couldn't follow up on a lot of the engages that were going down, and trust me, it's not going to be the players that I've complained about regularly that will continue to get complained about here, but Rich was the one that, offensively, I guess I should say, took advantage of maybe some of the DNF weaknesses. So credit to him. Again, he's been exactly as advertised for this team. They've not been consistent really at all throughout this year, but at the very least, Rich has been consistent in exactly what he is as a player. He's not a star, but he's good enough to be like the 7th or 8th best top laner in the LCK. Then for the rest of the team, they were also fine. Teddy had a good series, I think, all things considered. Again, he's not really a main character on any team, as I've continuously kind of pushed throughout the entirety of his career, let's be honest. But really, I think especially in this DRX era, he's not really been a main character for them, but he's good as a secondary carry. I think that's a perfect role for him if you can get someone like Rich making big moves on the top side, or Yehu or Sponge or someone like that stepping up. Teddy's job becomes a lot easier, because I think as a secondary carry, he starts to feel a lot more consistent. Now, at the very least, he was attempting to try and step up and capitalize on the things his team was creating. Not the case for the AD carry on the other side, so you definitely have to give him some credit there. And I think Teddy, ironically enough, has probably played better this year than he did last year. I was very low on Teddy last year because it felt like he was just kind of sitting around and doing nothing, and his KDAs were okay, and his team was losing, and it just kind of is what it was, right? Like, he just felt mentally checked out. He felt scared in terms of the way he was playing the game. I think he took a lot of that criticism to heart from a lot of the community and has started playing a bit more aggressive this year, which is obviously very good, but DRX is still not consistent in any regard. Ondel is still a support that I have a ton of questions about, even if he was okay here today. Sponge is a jungler I have major question marks about, because it feels like even the good performances we got at the beginning of the year from a player like Sponge are starting to go away. Yehu was solid in this series. Once again, it just kind of becomes very consistent with him that he can take advantage of the bad mid laners, can't really go up against the good ones. You know, DRX is who we thought they were, and they played like it in this series, and unfortunately for DNF, they are also who we thought they were in terms of their performance and their production. But Berserker is going to be the obvious choice for dead of the series here. Go watch this Kai'Sa game in game 2 and tell me anything he did. Like a single thing this entire game. Multiple Wukong engages or Rel engages that end up going off for DNF, even with a gold lead in their favor that Berserker just does not capitalize on, where he just stands there and kind of watches the game end up passing him by. I don't know if he's scared because his team has been so bad in terms of selecting when to go in at any point throughout this year, or if he's just given up, like if he's mentally checked out, which I honestly wouldn't blame him all that much for. Like, whatever the reason, this is a really bad performance, I would say, all things considered, for Berserker, and he was the worst player on the Rift. They win this series, or at the very least, they win game number 2 if he's locked in and actually doing damage on Kai'Sa, but he wasn't. He was standing there watching the game. It was a 4v5 because, you know, he was actively a spectator in terms of how this ended up going down. I think that there are some positives to talk about for DNF. Already talked a bit about Dudu. I thought he was great in lane, just couldn't really do anything in the team fights because Rich was a bit more active. Pioshik had a couple of really nice engages on the Wukong in game 2, and I think he did a good job to get a lead early on, but just didn't really end up mattering in the end because his AD carry never followed up. Bulldog continues to be very safe and very passive, the worst mid laner in the league, and I think at this point it's not even arguable. And Life is also just really out of form. It's hard to play support when your AD carry is not trying, and it's also hard to play support when you have terrible synergy with your own jungler. So just kind of ends up being the case for DNF that even when they play okay and they stay competitive in these games, they just don't really have the finalizing touches to be able to overcome a team that, even with DRX playing, you know, mediocre league before this, at the very least they were good enough in this series to capitalize on the advantages they generated for themselves. So again, credit to DRX. They end up taking this series, and hopefully this gets them back on the right track. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and we move up to the Legend group for their first series of the week. It was a matchup between Gen.G and NS RedForce, where Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-0, and once again, it's just the best team in the league beating up on NS, who just can't compete with anybody right now in the Legend group. They have yet to pick up a single series win so far in the Legend group, and honestly, I doubt that they will at this point in terms of how they're playing. It feels like they've gotten worse and worse and worse every single game. They've been beaten up and brutalized over and over again by the best teams in the world, because that's really just the rest of the teams in Legend group. Even a KT Rolster team that was looking beatable, they put Peter back in as the starting support, and all of a sudden, obviously, Wei is not there to run it down and lose them every single game, and so even KT looks like they're a full tier above NS at this point. It just does not feel competitive in any way, shape, or form from NS. There are a couple of players on this team that I think are okay. Outside of that, I think it's kind of been a nightmare. For Gen.G, it's awesome. I mean, this team plays the map better than anybody in the world, and I don't even think it's all that close in terms of just how things are going so far in 2025. You can give a lot of credit to teams like T1 and Anyone's Legend that I think are very good in that regard, but the way that Gen.G is able to control tempo and control timing, like, it's why their games are so effortless from them. If they get an early lead, there is no one in the world, there is no other team in the world that does quite as much with an early lead as Gen.G does. Even, you know, teams like T1 and AL that are very, very strong, they're much more versatile in terms of, oh, you know, if we get an early lead, we might still need to execute on a couple of team fights. Gen.G's macro will beat you by itself. Like, you cannot lose 1v1 in lane to these players, because if you give them a gold lead, it's actually cooked. Like, there's no way to be able to come back. And I think we continuously see that when they pick these big macro-oriented comps, specifically their Game 2 draft with the Vi Galio here. That was just impossible to deal with. Chovy, for me, is going to be player of the series, but this is super open, like, as it always is for Gen.G. Whoever you really think was the most fun to watch is kind of your pick. I think the Galio being able to move around the map and creating that big macro advantage, to me, was the most important part of that second game. But, like, are you not looking at Ruler, you know, on this Caitlyn? Are you not looking at Keem dominating on Renekton and Gwen in game number 1? Like, there are so many different options for player of the series here, as there always are for Gen.G, that, you know, just kind of narrows down to personal preference. But again, I think watching this team play the map and watching them really push their macro advantage through mid lane and through Chovy on something like Galio, it really does go to showcase why this is the highest win rate Galio team in the world, and they were last year as well. Because when you give Gen.G this kind of pick that can move around the map and just create all these opportunities, it's impossible to deal with. Chovy is going to get a lead in the mid lane, and then you are not going to be able to take a fight anywhere on the map without losing it almost immediately. And it is what it is. It's a complete stranglehold against some very talented teams. Gen.G just doesn't feel like they can be beaten in this playstyle. So you need to be able to take them off of this. Obviously, that, you know, is a plus for Fearless best of fives, which I think is the more interesting conversation, because when they get drafts like this, they just don't lose. Like, it really is that simple. I think, like I said, everybody else played well. Keen got it on broadcast. Totally get it. Thought he was really fun to watch here. Definitely outplayed Kingen. I think Kingen has really been on the decline. He's been terrible so far in the spring or the summer split. And we'll talk about Lehens as well. The two big veterans on this team that kind of carried them at the beginning are not there right now in terms of their production. Canyon continues to be excellent, was way better than Gideon. Ruler and Duro continue to be the most consistent bot lane in the entire league. Argue with a wall about that one. I do love Gumayushi and Keria, and they've been, you know, better. I think their best games are better than Ruler and Duro's, and I would even agree with that. But in terms of consistency throughout this year, like, oh my God, I can't stop glazing this duo. They're really that good. And then Chovy in the mid lane. Like, what else do you want me to say? Like, it's Gen.G. They won everything so far this year for a reason. They're on pace to absolutely decimate the rest of this year. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, no team is unbeatable, and, you know, best of fives are a different beast in Fearless, but for now, the team is looking pretty damn good. And then for Nongshim on the other side, like, it's their veterans that are really letting them down right now. I don't think there's any argument in that direction that Kingen and Lehens have been probably the two weakest players on this team so far this split. Like, Jiwoo and Gideon have not been good. Calyx is the only player that's even played fine for this team, which is ironic enough, and that's kind of where the positivity comes in, is that, you know, Calyx was good in this series, or at least he was fine. He wasn't a problem. He wasn't actively making mistakes. He was trying to push the game forward. He was playing relatively aggressive in terms of his positioning, like especially on the Talia in game number one. It just didn't matter. Everything else ended up going awry. At some point, we have to start pointing fingers at Lehens for just being not good this split. Like, I get it. KDA is never going to look good for Lehens when he's on a bad team or on a team that's losing quite frequently, because that's just the kind of player he is. But this is the guy who every single series has, I believe, picked one of Elise or Shen 100% of the time so far in the summer split. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I genuinely believe that's like 100%. Either Elise or Shen has come out in every single series for Lehens, and neither of those champions are viable. Like, genuinely, he's just running it in draft, and he's losing every game. Go watch this Elise game and tell me that that champion does anything. Like, I know I've been on an anti-Elise kick for basically the entire year, but Elise has been nerfed. Like, even the good version of Elise from the beginning of the year is not there anymore, and I already didn't like that pick. Now you're sitting here with the bad version of Elise in the support position, blind picking Ezreal and getting completely obliterated by Caitlyn Nico in the bot lane and instantly losing your team the game. It's just unplayable. Nongshim, I can't tell if they're just horribly managed and horribly coached, or if they genuinely are just tilted off of their ass right now, because there's just nothing else left to say. This is unacceptable from a draft strategy, and then they play it out as bad as possible. Kingen's continuously getting beaten down on the top side. Even a lot of his AP counter picks that he was picking earlier on in the year aren't working. They bring the Aurora topside to face the Gwen. That doesn't work out. They've basically given up on a lot of the things like a Nivea top that they were going for earlier. Kingen looks very lost now. Gideon has not been able to keep his form up. Again, Calyx is the only player that's showing anything right now on Nongshim, and you're in the best mid lane league in the world. You have to play Chovy, BDD, Faker, and Zeka every game. It's like, what is he even supposed to do? It's not like he's ever going to dominate those matchups. So Nongshim is just completely doomed. Again, I expect them to go winless in this legend group. And for Gen.G, like, they continue to rock. Like, they just continue to be excellent. We'll see what happens later on in the week. This was a worst versus first legend group matchup. No surprises here. Then moving on now to our second day of action here in the LCK in week 14, and we kicked off day 2 with a legend group matchup between KT, Rolster, and Hanwha Life Esports, where HLE are going to pick up the 2-1 series victory, the first series this week to go all 3 games, and HLE do it in very funny fashion. The fact that KT lost this can only be described as KT-esque. Like, it really just is what it is with this organization at this point. They have everything going for them. They have all the gold. They have all the resources. You have an Aphelios, you're playing from ahead, and you throw the game away. It just is what it is. One final fight that HLE just wins for no explicable reason. KT just disconnect in terms of the way they play it, and all of a sudden the game is over. It's very funny that it ended up happening like that, but it's very KT Rolster, and quite frankly, it's kind of HLE-esque, maybe, at least to an extent, right? Like, this is a team that, you know, is known for being able to step up in big moments in game 3s. Maybe that's not been the most consistent trend throughout 2025 in particular, but that was the case at the beginning of the year, there in the LCK Cup, and that certainly was the case last year as well. A lot of these players kind of known as very clutch players like Zeka and Viper, so definitely not surprising to see HLE be able to figure it out at the end of Game 3 here, but definitely a funny turn in terms of how things ended up going. Zeus, for me, is going to get player of the series because he was the one to make the biggest impact at the end of Game number 3, but really, I mean, he had some moments in this series. Like, you can look at Game 1 on the Rumble, and there were some times where it's just like, that was not very good. The Game 2 on Mbessa, very, very good. So no real major issues in that front. I just think that it really came down to the big plays that ended up being made, and I think Zeus was the one to step up and do that. Perfect was not very good on the other side of this matchup, which we will talk about. I think people are overreacting to this. KT fans have lost their minds. I genuinely can't deal with them anymore. I've had to mute the names of the KT players on Twitter because some of the takes I see actually just make me feel like I'm getting dumber by the second, but we'll talk about that when we get over to KT. At least for now, Zeus looking good and definitely the better top laner here. I think the only other player you could consider here was Viper in the bot lane. He was the most consistent piece, I would say, for HLE. Didn't really make any major errors, but also don't really think he was the main character, even on things like Zeri and Kaisa towards the end of this series. He was doing a ton of damage, and I think you can give him credit for being the player that, you know, screwed up the least in game number 3. But again, I just don't think he was the main character of this series. So as an AD carry, it kind of feels hard to judge you if you're not the one that you're playing around. Peanut was pretty solid, but Cuz was also very good. It was just kind of two junglers trying to facilitate for the rest of their teams, and I think both doing a relatively okay job. Zeka still has a lot of things he needs to fix. He's certainly not been perfect, but BDD has been, and he's been, you know, better than Zeka, and I think we saw that here. Delight, I think, was a very aggressive playmaker. Some of those plays worked, some of them absolutely did not. But again, HLE is just an inconsistent team. It does feel like talent-wise, they're just better than the bottom two teams here in Legend Group. That makes them a top 3 team in the LCK, but they do feel like a step off of T1 or, you know, Gen.G in terms of the upper part of the standings, which I don't think we expected, you know, coming off of the beginning part of this year, coming off of winter, hell, even coming off of the end of the spring regular season. I think everybody saw this team going to MSI, and it just didn't really happen. They've not really been able to recover. Hopefully they can figure it out soon. And for KT on the other side, you know, like, they had it, right? Like, they had it in the palm of their hands and they gave it away. Like, this should have been a win for them. And I think that there are a couple of big takeaways. First and foremost, KT fans need to stop overreacting. They need to stop sitting here and saying, oh, we almost had this series and then we lost it. Let's replace somebody. Let's, you know, change the roster. This is literally the only thing that has ruined KT throughout this year, is the fact that they've looked at this specific starting 5 and said, we need to change it in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's been casting on the top side, whether it's been Wei on the bot side, whether it's been Paddock in the AD carry role, it hasn't really mattered. Every change they've made has made this team worse, and it's not been close. Like, there really is no argument. And so when you look at a series that they should have won against Hanwha Life with this group of 5, and you go, oh, like, we have to make a change, to me it's delusion. And to me it's the fact that I don't think a lot of LCK fans actually, like, watch the games or have any real analysis on the games. To me, a lot of them like the players, and it's funny for a league, and I don't mean to go on this tangent so early. I might talk about this a bit more later on in the video as well, but it's so funny that the league that's kind of been heralded as the macro region and the one that's the highest quality gameplay, where you get to see some of the best teams in the world, you know, play against each other regularly. Like, I think the fan base often just gravitates a lot more to, you know, oh, I like X player, like, and not really a lot of gameplay analysis. And so you get this kind of echo chamber that is constantly calling for certain players to be replaced, and for certain players whose narratives are just wrong to be, you know, put in their spot. Like, I get it. Like, you want these Challengers League players to work out. They have not so far. This is the iteration of 5 that you should stick to for KT. You were so close to beating HLE. If they had won this series, if they had just closed out game number 3, regardless of how Perfect played in game 2 or really at the end of game 3, are we sitting here having a completely different discussion? Are we talking about this team, you know, being a genuine top 3 threat? Like, that's the conversation we would be having. We were one fight away from that conversation. So to me, it just feels ridiculous to be in this position. Perfect is still dead of the series, by the way. I'm not going to excuse the way he played, but Perfect was also excellent at the end of spring. He was really somebody that elevated a lot of this team when they really needed him the most. And while he's been a bit more ineffective, I would say, so far in summer, it's because he's going up against the best top laners in the league every single series. I don't get why KT fans expect themselves to compete with T1 and with Gen.G. Like, yes, HLE, I think, is within reach because that team is underperforming, but Perfect is not Zeus. And if you're trying to expect Perfect or casting to come in and be, Zeus for this team, you're delusional. Like, there's nothing else for me to say. I like KT Rolster for what they are. They are the clear-cut number 4 team right now in the LCK, and they had a chance to break through here, and they just couldn't capitalize. You know, speaking a little bit on the rest of the team, Cuz and BDD I thought played really well, as they always do. Decked him at a couple of really great games. Wasn't so incredible, I would say, in game 2. The Sivir probably was a bit of a problem in that game, but outside of that, I thought was really important towards KT's success. Peter has been a massive upgrade to Wei, who is the worst player in the LCK, and it's not particularly close. He almost single-handedly got KT out of Worlds contention, you know, when he was playing, so I'm glad to see Peter back in full-time. Again, this team was one fight away from winning this series. I'm not going to panic. And for HLE, you know, I want to kind of panic for them. I'm honestly more concerned for them because their expectations are so much higher with this roster. They've been champions this year, and it doesn't really feel like they're latching onto that right now. I think there is still a lot to grow into with this team, but, you know, there's still a lot of concern there as well. But then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and we go back down to the Rise group for a matchup between OK BRION and BNK FearX, where BFX are going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Bro has been a very interesting team to try and talk about over the course of the past few months because, you know, in very Bro fashion, they've just not been able to find any sort of consistency. I think at some point we've realized that the top 2 teams in Rise group are very clear. Dplus KIA, as inconsistent as they are, have to be considered there, and BNK FearX is a top 2 team, and then the bottom 2 teams of DRX and the DN Freecs are there as well. And so you kind of just have Bro like very clearly at the number 8 spot. And I think they played up to that, and BFX, quite frankly, played up to their number 7 ranking in this series here because I think they looked good, but inconsistently good. There are still a lot of things wrong with this team in terms of how they play the game. They just kind of get bailed out by their superior mechanical talent coming out of the bot lane right now. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Diablo is once again player of the series. He's maybe gotten this every single time BFX has played. I think I gave it to Kellen once, maybe to Vikla once, or Raptor, or Clay. Like, you know, they've had one series each, I would say, where you can kind of go, you know, you were pretty good here today. But Diablo's the guy on this team. He makes or breaks everything that BFX end up going through throughout the end of this year, and he's going to determine their chances of being able to get into playoffs proper, which I don't think is completely unrealistic for this FearX team, at least in the state that they're currently in. Do have a bit of a bone to pick in terms of just talking about things. First and foremost, I would love to get hyped up about Diablo as a player that can take over the league and kind of get promoted up to being, you know, on one of these better rosters and really be one of the AD carries of the future. He clearly has the mechanical talent to do so. But we've seen this before. Like, I would be remiss to not point out that there have been multiple AD carries in very similar positions to Diablo with a very good support that has a lot of experience, that can shot call and make things easy. He can just kind of be this big mechanical, you know, talent that can move in a different direction. Even on this same organization, I hate to make the comparison, but I hope we don't have another Prince on our hands in terms of how things end up breaking down because, you know, Diablo, while he is very talented, does make some bad decisions. And we saw that in game 2 on the gym, where it just didn't really feel like he was in it at all. When he loses quite badly. So again, I love Diablo and I love the way he's playing, and I think in the right organization with the right talent around him, you can turn him into one of the best AD carries in the world. Like, I'm right on board with that conversation, but I just don't want it to seem like I'm saying that that's guaranteed to happen, that a bad team should pick him up and rebuild around him, because I think if you don't put good talent around Diablo, or at least like a good shot caller around Diablo, things can get bad pretty quickly, and we've seen that when he just gets a little bit overexcited. But another narrative I want to at least kind of push back on is this whole Kalista thing. I get it that most LCK fans only watched MSI. They don't really watch a lot of the other regions. Let's not pretend like Kalista's not been dominating every region since MSI. Like, I get it. Like, oh, you know, Diablo can even win on Kalista. Okay, yeah, Kalista's like, what, 9-1 in the LPL right now? Like, it's something ridiculous. You know, let's not talk about Kalista like she's terrible. She had one bad tournament. It is what it is, right? She's very playable, and Diablo ended up performing well on her. So, you know, again, I'm not trying to push back too much on the Diablo hype, but I just want to kind of throw out some context that I think a lot of people aren't throwing out for a lot of the things that people talk about when it comes to him as a player. But everybody else on the team was honestly fine in this series. You know who played really well here? Vikla. And I don't think Vikla is getting enough credit for the fact that he's been much better over the course of summer. This was the case last year as well on Rare Atom, where he was a nightmare at the beginning of the year and then seemed to figure things out, seemed to get a bit more comfortable. It's why he came back to the LCK, is because he honestly was okay for that Rare Atom team at the end of last year. You know, it's kind of going down similarly. Again, mid lane pool in the LCK is much harder than it is in the LPL, but, you know, Vikla, not the worst player in the league like he was pretty much unanimously through the first couple months of the year. I think Clear has also started to step up again. I thought he played well. You know how big of a fan of Kellen I am. I will continue to ride that train because I just think that you watch the gameplay and clearly he has such a massive impact on the way BFX play. Raptor is also a player that I think is pretty fun. You have two junglers facing off against their former organizations in this one. Raptor, of course, formerly of Bro, Krakow, formerly of Sandbox. So pretty fun overall series, and BFX ends up coming out on top, bro. Not the most consistent, certainly not the cleanest in terms of their gameplay. I think their draft in Game 3 is criminal in terms of what they ended up picking, and they got pretty heavily punished for it, but I think that there are multiple things to break down here. I think there are some pretty big upside players on this team. Again, Closer, I think, has been decently consistent throughout this year. You could even make the argument this is one of the better years of his career just because I've been a bit lower on Closer. I think Krako has also been a positive for the team, although admittedly much less over the past couple of weeks than he was at the beginning of the split. Hype had one good game and then was pretty terrible in the other two, but dud of the series for me is going to go to Morgan on the top side. This is almost entirely for the Gwen game in game number 1, where he was horrific, like truly terrible. I think people are going to overlook how bad that game was because he was okay in game 2 and game 3 wasn't the biggest problem in those. York was obviously not good. Like, you can't pick York if you're a bad team. It just doesn't really work like that, but Morgan was so bad in game 1, easily the worst game of the series, that to me it was a pretty obvious dud of the series as a whole. But Polu was in the conversation for me. Krako was certainly in the conversation for me, especially with that Wukong and Pantheon game. Neither really feeling all that comfortable. Again, Krako's been much worse in the second half of the split than he was in the first half. But Bro is what we thought they were. They're a competitive team, but not one that's better than the top 2 teams in this group, at least in terms of projections. And BFX are genuinely playing like an upper tier team in this group, with DK really struggling last week and not really finding their footing. I think it's realistic to expect BFX to be a team that can compete to make top 6 and to make the playoffs, and that would generally be considered a massive success for them. But then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the LCK week here, and we kick off with a legend group matchup between NS RedForce and T1, where T1 are going to eke out a victory, but just barely are going to be able to take this one. It really did feel like this was kind of up in the air. T1 definitely wasn't the most dominant team of all time here. They kind of got slammed in game 2. Didn't really feel like they were entirely on the front foot, but we had one player that really stepped up both in and out of lane in this game number 3, and that's what really tipped it over the scales for T1, that of course being Doran, their domestic savior on the top side of the map. The Kruglord, as he is now known, is really stepping up and looking great right now for T1. He's been great all year. He's always been great domestically. I've kind of died on that hill quite a bit in terms of just what the community sentiment generally was about him as a player. It really felt like a lot of people, I don't want to say disrespected, that almost feels a little bit too strong, but a lot of people were, very not kind, we'll say, to Doran's legacy in terms of how they discussed him, because all they remembered of him were those international appearances. And I think on T1, a lot of that story is going to get rewritten, and I think we're starting to see that. He's player of the series, by the way. It's very obvious. We'll get into it, but he was the one who ended up winning them game number 3, not only in lane in terms of just controlling wave perfectly, not letting the Yorick play the game really at all for Kingen on the other side of this, but generating so many resources for himself, being like 90 CS at 9 minutes into the game or something like that, like something ridiculous that just seems completely unfair on Jax, and then the gigantic 4-man stun at the end of that game to really seal the deal for T1. Things were not locked up by any stretch, but T1 time ends up coming around. Doran gets that 4-man stun on the Jax and ends up completely breaking the game open. This is not the first, nor will it be the last late game that Doran ends up completely stealing away for T1. It's just something he does at such a high level, and he does it so consistently, and honestly, he's just a really good player. He's been like this for a long time. I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that because he's on an org that people like now, or at least that, people are biased towards in T1. They're finally starting to see the player that has been there on Gen.G and Hanwha Life and these other teams for a very long time. I don't think Doran is playing better for T1 than he did for those other orgs. I, again, just think people are starting to notice the things that he does at a higher level because of the T1 brand recognition type of thing. So credit to him. He won them this series. He was fantastic in game 3. Was very good in game 1 on the Rumble as well. I want to make that clear. It wasn't just a game 3 Jax kind of angle for him, although game 3 was definitely the one where I think he expressed himself the most. I think Owner continues to look good, but Gideon was actually really solid in this series. Gideon had a phenomenal Pantheon game in game 2, so I don't want to give Owner too much credit, but I think generally speaking, he was pretty consistent in terms of his setups. This is one of the weaker Gumayushi KIA series, and that's saying something because I think they were easily the better bot lane of these two teams in this series, and yet, I'm saying that they were, one of their weaker performances. Again, it just goes to show where they've been at. I think KIA is kind of running away with MVP right now. Just in my opinion, if you're taking the summer split as something that is not connected to spring, obviously, if you're combining the splits like the LCK is, then perhaps it's a bit of a different story with players like Chovy, running away with it in their own regard. But in summer alone, KIA has been phenomenal. Guma's been along for that ride as well. Faker continues to be really big in terms of these setups in the late game, even if his laning phases are not perfect. Calyx has been so so impressive on the other side, which we will get into. But for T1, honestly, this kind of felt, like a T1 type of experience where they're going up against a team they absolutely should beat. And yes, they walk out with the victory, but it never really felt all that certain. It never really felt all that comfortable. And yet somehow it's a sub 27-minute victory. Just T1 things. And then for Nongshim on the other side, dud of the series I think was really obvious to me. It's going to Jiwoo. I think you could theoretically give this to Kingen, who got blasted in Game 3. The Yorick did not work out, but I think he was okay the rest of the series. I think the Mbessa was good in Game 2. I don't think the Ornn was a problem at all in Game number 1. I do think that Jiwoo was the biggest issue. I think his mispositioning on these hyper carries in Sivir and Jinx ended up really costing the team. And generally, I think Jiwoo has just been holding Nongshim back in terms of what their upside has been throughout the entirety of this year. That being said, do I think a good AD carry would completely change the fate and the fortune of what Nongshim is? Like even just a solid one like a Diablo coming in here, do I think that that would be good enough to completely change where Nongshim is at? No, I absolutely do not think that that would be the case. I think that there are plenty of things wrong with Nongshim right now, but Jiwoo is certainly a player that I think has been exposed by the fact that he has to play against the best AD carries in the league over and over again. He's just not ready for that kind of role. Lehens was better in this series, I guess you could say. Keria was still significantly more active and was a much bigger playmaker, but Lehens wasn't a problem outside of really game number 1. I think his game 3 and his game 2 were both very solid, so can't really complain about that too much. And then the jungle mid probably had their best series in a while here with Gideon and Calyx. That game 2 from them was actually just really good. Gideon looked fantastic on the Pantheon, playing around the double macro duo with Pantheon Taliyah. Honestly was impressed by that. So if that's going to be something they can keep going, I already hyped up Calyx a bit more previously this week. And so if he's going to continue to kind of grow and rise as a mid laner, perhaps this is someone they can actually build around. This has been a dead spot for Nongshim for a very long time. They've not been able to find a mid laner really since their inception. Even when BDD came over, he was a nightmare for this team. It was the worst year of his entire career. And so, for Nongshim, if they have finally found a young up-and-coming mid laner after trying so many players to come through their system, that would be a huge positive. And obviously, we hope that Gideon continues his good development. He's been great at the start of this year, but, these are consolation prizes. Nongshim is still winless in the Legend group, and they don't look like they're going to turn that around anytime soon. This felt like one of their better opportunities to be able to take a series, and yet T1, all they had to do was win one fight, and all of a sudden, everything is over. T1 are still the version of T1 that we know and love. It's just a little bit more chaotic right now, but this is a pretty classic T1 performance, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and it was a Rise group matchup between Dplus KIA and DRX, and Dplus KIA is going to win the 50-minute Game 3 banger between these two teams. The Rise group continues to produce, and honestly, with how boring the Legend group has been and just how uninteresting all the results have gone, and just really with the lack of anything noteworthy to even talk about in terms of the Legend group, thank God we have the Rise group, because honestly, the LCK would be unwatchable right now if it was just the top teams, going in the exact order every single time they play against each other in a round robin. At least we have bangers like this to look forward to. DK coming off of a miserable week for them in week 13, where they just looked like the worst version of themselves. They did not look competent. They got blasted by Bro to end that week. Everything just ended up being super negative for them. And DRX coming off of a much necessary and a much needed win over the DN Freecs. For these two teams to kind of come head to head right now, and DK to just barely come out on top is certainly a very, very fun way for this series to go. We can kind of go into some things, but really just know that Game 3 was a complete banger, where Sponge looked like he was going to be the hero for DRX on this Viego, constantly getting resets. Teddy had a ton of gold, ended up selling boots to try and play around this Elder with the Sivir, and it just did not work out. He didn't have the ability to kite out a lot of the damage coming in from Ahri and from Tom Kench, who was gigantic in Game 3, and the Viego goes from 0 to hero by getting caught out at the end of that game, and things end up going awry for DRX. DK definitely deserve a lot of credit, and Showmaker in particular deserves the most credit, in my opinion. He's my player of the series because I do think he was the one that really drove this forward, but you got to give credit to DRX as well. Like, they played well throughout a lot of this series. This was a lot closer than it ever had any right to be. DK is a team that feels like they should be competing for top 4, and quite frankly, they've been nowhere near that so far across the summer split. I've been very vocal about that on the channel. Showmaker still, I think, has been good. I think that there have been a lot of performances that he has carried for DK. Almost every single one of their wins this split you can trace back to where Showmaker has been, and this time on the Ahri in Game 3, on the Cassiopeia in Game number 2, I think you're looking at one of the more important kinds of performances that he can give give this team when everything is kind of struggling, when they can't find any form of consistency, when they can't set up around objectives. As long as you can start playing these fights well, things will work out. And that's what DK did. Credit again to Showmaker, because I do think he stepped up a lot in all of these big moments, and he's not necessarily getting the credit that maybe he deserves. He's the only real consistent player on DK right now. Even then, he's not looked good in their losses. Bromaker very much still exists against that team, but in their wins, he is the most essential piece for sure. I think Beryl had his best series of the split, certainly one of his better series of the split. I don't even think that's all that debatable. It's up there for all of those performances. I mean, I've been, ragging on Beryl for a long time on this channel, since 2022, really, since I've started doing weekly LCK content on this channel. I've been talking about how Beryl is overrated and about how there's not really a lot to like about his consistent gameplay, and he's actively gotten a lot of teams out of Worlds contention in terms of what he's been. Even when the team he played on went to Worlds and won Worlds in 2022, he was a menace in the regular season there, and then just figured it out or turned it on or whatever you want to say, going to the World Championships. 2023, 2024, even 2025 so far, they've all been bad years for Beryl. At least he was good here. I think the Bard was really important in game 2, and the Tahm Kench was massive in game number 3. That ended up really being the deciding factor. I just think Showmaker was a bit better in their second game and throughout the entire series, and so he gets the nod for player of the series. But him and Beryl, like Showmaker Beryl, they were the duo in this one. I think there is some credit to go to aiming, although for the most part he was just kind of set up to do his own thing. I think Teddy was probably even better than aiming, and we've always talked about these two as kind of interchangeable in terms of what they are as players. I've always thought that aiming is just a bit better mechanically. I still think that that's probably the case, but Teddy's certainly making a stronger argument this year than he has, in previous years, at least in my opinion, at least in recent memory, like not the T1 era days. I think that version of Teddy, definitely better than aiming, but modern Teddy, I think, is starting to kind of get back into that form. Lucid was aggressive, but honestly kind of lost the jungle matchup here. The KDAs don't necessarily show it, but Sponge, as long as he doesn't make a giant mistake at the end of game 3, maybe wins that on the Viego, doesn't work out. Shiwu continues to kind of be a disaster in lane. You cannot be giving these bad teams Yorick. I'm sorry, you just can't do it. Yorick is not a champion you give a team that needs to figure its shit out. Like, this is arguably the worst macro team in the entire league. You can't be playing Yorick. Like, it just doesn't work. It ended up working out for them because this team is super lucky, but, there are still plenty of problems with DK. I think they have a ton of things they need to fix, and this team, honestly, this result doesn't make me feel better about where they're at. It just kind of makes me more concerned. And for DRX, at least you put up a pretty good fight. Overall, a very good week for DRX in comparison to where they've been. You end up taking down the team that a lot of people were scared that you were going to lose to in DNF earlier on, and then go toe-to-toe with DK for a full 3 games. End up taking game 1. They could have taken game 3. Like, this was a pretty decent performance. I think players like Rich deserve a lot of credit for being decently consistent throughout this week. Teddy, I thought, was very good throughout a majority of this week. And I've been a Teddy hater on this channel, but I think over the last like 4 weeks, we'll say, like month and a half or so, I think Teddy's been playing better and more aggressive than I've seen him play in quite a while. So I'm willing to jump on that train, now that everybody else is off of it. It's kind of funny how that ends up working out, but Sponge also played really well for most of this series, just ends up making a catastrophic error at the end of game 3 that ends up losing his team the game. It happens. He's a young player. At least he had the good moments. He doesn't always have those. Yehu and Ondel were who I was deciding between for dud of the series here. I'm giving it to Ondel. I felt like his engages were just quite bad, and I think the support gap in this series was actually really consequential in terms of why DK was able to come out on top over DRX. I think if Ondel had been more aggressive, or at the very least more clinical in terms of the ways that he was able to engage and create opportunities for DRX, I think some things are just a tad bit different. Even if he just kind of, negates himself to peel and just kind of does the Tahm Kench roll on Nautilus instead, I think that there is a chance for DRX, but it felt like Ondel was making the wrong choices at the wrong times, and it cost the team. Yehu also got completely outplayed by Showmaker. I think that was very obvious, especially on the macro-oriented champs in the back half of the series, but that's Yehu. He's going to be fine against the bad mid laners, and he's not going to be able to perform against the ones that actually do show up on the day. DRX put up a good fight, but DK just narrowly edges out a victory. I don't feel great about either of these teams. I don't really feel great about anybody in the Rise group right now, but at the very least, DK are walking out with yet another win, which is important for the standings with where they're sitting right now. Then moving on now to day number 4, and starting off the back end of the week is a really big matchup here between Hanwha Life Esports and Gen.G, where Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. And the reason I say this is a big matchup is because really this is HLE's chance to prove that they are starting to get better footing. They don't have to win a series like this in order for me to feel better about the place that they are. They just need to show that they can be competent against a team like Gen.G, that they can compete at some level near the top of the standings. I think that there were some signs at the very least that was here, but I think that there were a lot, outside of that ended up being really negative for them as well. And so it's really hard to figure out where HLE is sitting right now. Gen.G, I'm not concerned about. I mean, this team is exactly who we thought they were. Yes, they kind of got blasted in game 2. It was not particularly close, but come on, man. You had Chovy on Ziggs, and, Keen played Yorick, and Yorick has been a nightmare pick in the LCK so far. It really felt more like a limit testing game than anything else. And so I'm willing to throw it out. I'm willing to say that it's not that big of a deal. But right now, I am really, really intrigued with where HLE is sitting at, because if they can clean up the small little things, the outliers, the things that are not particularly normal for them, I still think there's a very good team underneath. Viper had an amazing series here against Gen.G. It just did not matter. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series is obviously going to Chovy. If you watch these games, you definitely know that Chovy's rise ended up completely breaking game number 3. What a gap in the mid lane. Truly, there were a lot of memes kind of coming out around HLE after game number 3, both for Viper in terms of just, hello, where my team at? What's going on? But also Zeka, picking Cassio as the counter to Rise, the long-time counter pick. If you think back to like season 4, season 5, like Cassio was always kind of considered the Rise beater. That was always her role. And so it's funny to see that be pulled out here in competitive. I'm not sure Zeka has a ton of experience into the matchup because he just played it really bad and he had some really weird rune and just overall game decisions that ended up really costing him. But Chovy just massacred the matchup. His rise is ridiculously good. I mean, you can't give this guy macro threats. Again, we talked about it with the Galio earlier on in the week, and I think teams are starting to recognize, oh, Talia, Galio, we can't really give that over to Chovy. He's going to have too much agency. Rise is right there. I get that that champion has been nerfed at least a little bit and that he's probably not quite at the same level that he was before, but he's still incredibly strong and can still do a lot for this Gen.G team. And Chovy obviously pilots him at a high level. He does every champion at a high level, and just ended up being a really, really difficult game for HLE to win once Chovy got super far ahead because he could affect everything. I think Keen also deserves a lot of credit for just beating up on Zeus on the top side. Zeus has not been nearly the player he was in the spring split and the winter split throughout the rest of the year. He was incredible. He was the runner-up to the MVP award for me in spring. It was Chovy 1 and then Zeus 2 for me for MVP. He's been nowhere near that so far this split. He had a good series earlier this week, but this was a nightmare performance from him, which we will get into. Keen just massacred him. He was so much better on the top side in and out of lane. Canyon had another solid series. Ruler and Duro were fine. I think Duro had a couple of great moments here as a playmaker, even on the Blitzcrank in game number 3. Ruler, not as, focal pointy, I would say, for Gen.G, but that's okay. He doesn't have to be a main character in every single series. He was my player of the week last week. It's fine that he takes a bit of a backseat here. Gen.G are just awesome. You know who they are. You know what they're going to do. For Hanwha life, though, I think the much more interesting conversation starts here because you're talking about exactly what went right and what went wrong and how you can fix it for this team moving forward. I think what went right is obvious. Viper played out of his mind. He was incredible in this series. He was sitting on like 7-kill, Kaisa in game number 3, hoping and praying that literally anyone else on his team was able to do anything, and it just didn't happen. You could argue that Viper was the best player on the Rift here today, and I think that there is at least some conversation surrounding that. But, at the end of the day, if the rest of your team is not very good, then it's hard to play. I think Delight and Peanut you can give some kind of, I guess grace to in that regard, because I think that they kind of had to die for the Kaisa to get fed, and so you can kind of see the role of like, well, Trundle has a hard matchup here into game 3 once Rise starts to get going, and Delight can't really engage on anyone without him instantly getting blown up on the Alistar because you don't really have the damage advantage, and so you need to play these fights really slow. Delight and Peanut are going to have a hard time being able to play that out, but the solo laners, they just played so bad here today. Whoever you want to give Dead of the Series to out of those two is really up to you, but it has to go to one of Zeus or Zeka because both of them were very bad. I think Zeus might have been worse throughout the beginning part of the series, but man, I'm just so frustrated with where Zeka is right now that I have to give him Dead of the Series. And I get that this might be a bit of a biased pick, but honestly, Zeka's one of my favorite players in the world. Quite frankly, he's one of the players, if not the player, that put this channel on the map. When I made him an All-Pro in 2022, he goes to Worlds, wins Worlds, that DRX team, somebody I believed in, the whole time, and it really kind of showcased that, oh, maybe this guy actually knows what he's talking about, at least a little bit. Whatever's happened to him this split, like, he's got to reverse the mind curse that he is on. Game number 3 against Gen.G in the playoffs last split, where, they were up 2-0, they were 1 game away from going to MSI. Whatever magic voodoo curse someone cast on Zeka for that game 3 has not yet been reversed. He's played the worst league he's ever played. I think that includes his LPL tenure right now in terms of just being so inconsistent in lane and not really being able to generate anything for the team. The Cassio looked awful in game 3. It looked like he didn't know the matchup at all. The Talia looked worse for sure in game number 1 than Zeka normally does. This is a player that has not only been consistent in big moments, but consistent in the regular season ever since his breakout in 2022, and it's just not happening anymore. I don't know where the Zeka I fell in love with from a gameplay perspective went. He's not here anymore, man. Like, this guy has lost all the spark. He needs to be able to find it, and I think that's what makes it so easy for me to fall back in love with HLE as a team and potentially with them getting back on track, because it really is as simple as, well, can Zeka and Peanut start playing like they did 2 months ago? If yes, they're gonna be a threat to win the league. Like, that's what this HLE team was for all of 2025. Hopefully they can get there, but for now, Gen.G owns the LCK. They continue to push forward. Stop giving Chovy macro threats. At some point, we have to learn that this guy's going to break you on them. But then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and the Rise group continues to be banger after banger after banger. It's OK BRION taking on the DN Freecs, and the DN Freecs are going to pick up yet another victory. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's 3 straight weeks with a win for DNF after only getting 1 through basically the entire beginning of the year, or I guess 2, really throughout the entire beginning of the year if you include the LCK Cup. What is happening to DNF? Why have they figured out how to play games, and why do they look so good when they actually figure it out? Like, this team has been so much better in the past 3 weeks than they have been at any point throughout the year, and that's a pretty funny thing to say about a team that's been, you know, out of contention. They've been eliminated for weeks now. This team couldn't even make play-ins, even if they tried at this point. Even if they won out 2 weeks ago, they wouldn't have made play-ins. And so, you know, it's crazy to see the position that they're in after being like 1-17 or whatever a couple of weeks ago, but they are here now, which is funny for Bro. I mean, come on, like, are we shocked that this team ends up being inconsistent enough to lose a series to DNF? No, we should absolutely not be shocked about this by any stretch of the imagination. Bro is not a good team. They just have been able to take advantage of other similarly bad teams, and I think that really becomes clear the more you watch them. So let's go ahead and get into it. Dudu for me is going to get player of the series. I think he was the one that really was creating a ton for DNF. Certainly the one that was capitalizing the most on that creation. The Rumble game in particular in Game 1, absolutely massive. He's still obliterated in Game 3 on the Cassante. I think there's more argument about Game 3 than there is about Game 1, but to me, when you look at the series as a whole, Dudu was the player that I think had the most influence on DNF, and boy, have we been looking for a performance like this out of him for quite a long time. This was a guy who was really becoming a channel darling, like one of the channel darlings in 2023, and at the beginning of 2024, he was stuck on that terrible Hanwha Life team, and then he went over to a terrible KDF team, and just everything felt like it was never going to work out for a guy who was playing well individually and just couldn't really translate it to, you know, a ton of wins because his team was terrible. And yet, now that he finally has teammates around him, teammates, I say with quotations, I guess, you know, things have gotten worse. He's significantly worse now than he has been previously, but if there is still a glimpse of that version of him that was there in 2022, 2023, then maybe there is something to build off of here in the top lane, because that guy was a borderline all-pro kind of player. Like, he was a top 4 top laner in the LCK, and I will take no debate on that. The best version of Dudu has been phenomenal at this level before. It just hasn't been there this year. If he can get that back, especially over a player like Morgan on the other side, that's very positive. Pioshik is the other player you really want to shout out here for DNF, because I think he is the other player to really kind of create all the opportunities. Pioshik's Lee Sin, baby, in game number 2. Now, how much of that is Pioshik on one of his signature champions? I say signature champs. It's not Kindred level of signature, but the Lee Sin certainly something I remember him for. And how much of that is Krako on Zed, who was a nightmare, like absolutely catastrophically terrible? I think that's kind of up to you to decide, really kind of your determination in terms of how much you want to give him credit. I don't think he was quite as effective as Dudu in Game 1, and so I ended up giving him player of the series, but Broadcast gave it to Pioshik. I can kind of understand both. I think both are understandable, and both make a lot of sense. Bulldog, Berserker, Life, I think they played much better than they did earlier this week. Berserker felt like he woke up for this series, which was not something you could always say. Certainly the series earlier against DRX, that was not the case. So credit to this team. It really does feel like they're peaking at the exact wrong time, and that's a pretty funny thing to say that as a team that's already eliminated, but you know what? They've got nothing to lose, so they might as well go out there and win some games and spoil some fun for a team like Bro. But for Bro, this is a consequential loss. This is a team that's fighting it out for one of those play-in spots, and every single loss or win matters at this point. It's them and DRX that are really fighting it out for that third spot coming out of the Rise group, and you can't really afford to be playing like this. Krako in particular, who's getting my dud of the series here, cannot afford to play the way that he did across this week. Same thing for Morgan, which we will get into on the top side, but what a terrible performance from Krako. I mean, the Poppy, the Zed, both of those games were quite bad. Poppy set up incredibly well in game number 1, going into a Vi, going into a Rakan. This should be a really, really good Poppy angle for him to take over, and he just can't really do anything. Then he plays Zed in game 3, and, you know, Zed's a hard champion to pilot, especially in the jungle, and sometimes when it doesn't work, it really, really doesn't work, and I think we saw that here for Krakow, who had a ton of major problems. Honestly, I'm not going to say he single-handedly lost this because I think Morgan was terrible on the top side, but Krakow was the biggest problem here today, and that's a really big issue because this team needs him to step up. He's like their one genuinely good player outside of maybe closer right now, but Morgan has just completely fallen off. This guy's had a terrible year, I think, in terms of, what the expectations were for him. He's been a pretty consistently good top laner at the LCK level for quite a few years now, kind of the franchise player of Bro in that regard, and yet this year has really been a downgrade, I would say, in terms of his skill set. If he can get back on track, I think that there is still room for him in the LCK, but he's looked bad, and honestly, it looks like a player that I might not want to retain going into 2026, which I just didn't think I was going to say about Morgan. He was worse across this whole week, I would say, than Krakow was, even if Krakow was worse in this series. Closer was fine. Hype is just kind of nothing. Berserker certainly outplayed him in this series, and Polu couldn't really create anything, especially on the playmakers like the Bard and the Nico, these more aggressive picks that require some level of finesse. He just doesn't have that at this level, so Bro just is what they are. They're not a very good team, and I think a lot of people just assume that they are because they're able to take games off of Dplus KIA, but they're also not a very good team. So just kind of lands in this spot where Bro can lose to anyone, and they very much did here today. And for DNF, not a consequential win, but certainly a fun one nonetheless. They have nothing to play for, nothing to move forward with, and yet they continue to trudge along. I'm excited for these players. Hopefully they can start to get some of that confidence back for next year, whatever the circumstances may be, whether it's with this org or with a different org, who knows, but it's cool to see this team picking up wins. But that's going to bring us to day number 5, our 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 14. And kicking off day 5 was a matchup between BNK FearX and Dplus KIA, where DK are going to pick up the 2-0 series win. They are going to start showing some promise. This team looked very good in this series. I think that there were some drawbacks. Diablo continues to be really aggressive. I think Raptor had a couple of really nice plays in this series, specifically on the Pantheon in game number 1. But for the most part, this was DK kind of being better across the board, just having a ton going for them, and generally just kind of diffing their opposition in a couple of key areas, most notably the solo lanes, which were very much in favor of Dplus KIA in this series, even if the KDAs don't necessarily represent that as well as you would think. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's get into it. Showmaker is once again, for me, going to get player of the series, the second one this week. I believe this is his second week with 2 player of the series as well. He's gotten 4 on the split as a whole. That's pretty darn good. That, I believe, is tied for first right now for me on the channel in terms of where things are at. That should go to show you just how important Showmaker is in terms of these victories. Not all of them are created equal, and he has played quite bad in a couple of series. He's pulled himself a dud of the series here and there as well, so not everything's perfect for Showmaker, but going up against this version of Vikla, yeah, he can deal with that, and that ended up being a really big positive for DK, the Annie, the Ahri, both of them as kind of creators in the mid-game to really move Lucid's game along and really make that a lot easier for DK to play through. That's what really ended up being the special sauce, if you will, for DK in this series. But it wasn't just Showmaker. Lucid obviously still had to step up and do his own thing. Broadcast ended up giving him player of the series. I think a lot of that is the KP and just generally being involved in so much, but I also think quite a bit of that is just, overall KDA bias. I think Showmaker was probably more active and certainly more consequential towards the plays that were made in this series because of just how far behind Vikla was on the other side after the 1v1 in the mid lane, so I do want to give Showmaker that level of credit, but Lucid was still very good. I think this is one of his better series in a while. This is a player that felt like he was breaking through at the beginning of the year, and even at the end of last year, he's just not been able to maintain it really at any rate, and so hopefully he's going to be able to keep it up. Raptor still played fine in this series, so just kind of, hopefully Lucid can start to be a bit more aggressive in terms of how he pushes the advantages he gets in the early game. But Shiwu as well on the top side, again, much better than his KDA would indicate. I think he actually played fine in this series. The Sion game, super important in game 2. Clear had a miserable game on the Cassante, which we will talk about. The Gwen was fine in game number 1. I think Shiwu has really kind of drawn the ire of the community, which I find so funny. I'm going to be honest, like, there's going to be a little bit of a tangent here, but you have all of these KT fans that are obsessed and, like, constantly talking about the Challengers team and just talking about how every single player who's come through that system, whether it be Hambach or Wei, the players who have already failed, Casting, who has like really high potential, Hype, who's on Bro, or most obviously Zinni in the mid lane there. Like, all of these players are going to be superstars at the next level. Like, tier 2 success always translates and all of this stuff. And then you have a player in Shiwu who had success at the tier 2 level, got brought up to the tier 1 level, is really good at one specific thing, which is team fighting at the tier 1 level, but still has to work on his laning and generally has a lot of ways to go, and the community has completely turned on him as a player. It's just really funny to see how certain tier 2 players players get a ton of preference at the tier 1 level, and others are just kind of immediately scapegoated in terms of what their team's performance looks like. But I think Shiwu has been fine as a rookie top laner for DK. You can't expect rookies in the LCK to come in and be world beaters day number 1. I think top lane's been a pretty weak role, all things considered, in the LCK, at least from a consistency standpoint. And Shiwu's been fine. He's been up there with some of the best of them throughout a lot of this year. Not so much this split, but I think there's still a lot to grow into for him as a player. And I think people are way too sour on him and his game. I still really like him moving forward. Aiming and Barrel were also fine, but Diablo was just so flashy that it took some of the pressure away. We'll get into it with Diablo. Again, I think he's a very good player, but DK was better, basically across the board, especially with Beryl in the support position. So nice series from them and a nice week from DK. And then for BFX on the other side, Vikla is the obvious choice for dead of the series. What a miserable performance from Vikla. And after I just talked about him playing better in summer earlier on this week, obviously some people are probably going to clown me for that after this result in the comment section, but it's true. Vikla has been better in summer than he was in spring. That doesn't mean he's been good, and it doesn't absolve him from these bad games. It just means that he was that terrible at the beginning of the year. And I think that there have at least been some good performances. He was good for this team earlier this week. He was the second best player in their earlier series, with Diablo kind of, taking that number 1 role and Vikla taking the number 2 role. To pretend like he hasn't had good games this split would be kind of a lie, certainly in comparison to what he was at the beginning of the year, but the bad games still very, very much stand out, and that's just the reason he doesn't look like an LCK mid laner, is because you can't really have bad games like this at this level. Obviously we've talked at length, extensively, about how difficult it is to play mid lane in the LCK, having to play the best mid laners in the world over and over again. Rise Group has made it a bit easier because it's really just Showmaker down here that's trying to, kind of push his team forward, but Vikla needs to be better. What a terrible Talia game for him. Clear does not, deserve to be let off the hook, though, I guess we'll say. He was completely outclassed in this series. I thought he played terrible on the Cassante in Game 2. One of his weaker performances in a while. Clear has been known to kind of, space out every once in a while, to not be always mentally locked in. I'm not saying that that's what happened here, but it certainly is a possibility. Raptor was very greedy and aggressive. I think for the most part that was fine, and the bot lane continues to be a strength for BFX, but I also do think we're starting to get to the point where the Diablo circle jerk is just going a little too strong for me, where, yeah, he's a good player. Is he a top 380 carry in the LCK? No. Let's not try to overhype this guy. We can look at a game and say, yeah, he was good here, but, he didn't do all that much. He was trying, but, at the end of the day, he wasn't, 1v9ing in the same kind of way that I've seen other 80 carries do. I think some of the hype machine does get out of control here in the LCK. People did the same thing with Prince, and I think, again, I'm not saying that it's going to be the same with Diablo. I'm just cautioning people to try and remember history and not just completely repeat it blindly, as most LoL esports fans do, because we all know how the community goes. It just kind of is what it is. You guys have reminisced with me in the comment section about that before. So overall, BFX are who we thought they were. They're the second best team in the Rise Group, and DK still outpaced them when they are at their best. Showmaker still looks great when he's able to generate a lead. If Lucid and Beryl in particular can play the way they did here, if Shiwu can take that next step, aiming is kind of what aiming is. Who he's going to be. DK can still be a threat to even make worlds. That's how volatile the LCK is right now, but all of those things need to go right, and they still have a lot to prove. But that's going to bring us to our second game of day 5 and our final series of the week here, and it is a huge one, the most interesting one to talk about all week. The best for last, KT Rolster taking on T1 in a telecom war, and for the first time in I can't even remember how long, KT Rolster is going to come out on top 2-0. They don't drop a single game in this series as they end up picking up the win. Huge stuff from them, and you know what? You thought you were going to avoid the rant, you thought you were going to avoid the braggadocious tone when it comes to KT Rolster. No, you are going to get it in full force in this series, because how could I possibly go in any other direction when it comes to the analysis for this series? All these KT fans want to sit here and whine and complain about, oh, this player is not good enough and this player is not good enough and we need to swap them out and we need to constantly be making roster changes and this player from the Challengers League needs to play and this player from the Challengers League needs to play, when it's been clear over and over again that this version of KT Rolster, this starting 5, is the only starting 5 this year that's been able to compete with the upper echelon, that's actively looked very good and has shown themselves to be an upper tier team in the LCK. Here is your proof. I need to stop hearing this. I'm going to lose my mind if another KT fan comes out and goes, well, casting would actually upgrade this team in the top lane. I'm gonna lose my marbles. They're gonna fly all over the floor. I can't do it anymore. I see it every day on social media. And yes, are the core pieces of this team good? Yes, but look at how well Perfect played in this. And also, I don't want to hear from Reddit about how Perfect has been terrible this year. Just show you don't watch the games. It's totally totally fine. I totally understand. His stats don't look great. His impact on the game is undeniable. That was the case at the end of spring for sure. When he was reinserted back into the lineup for KT Rolster, it's been the case so far in this summer split as well. Perfect is player of the series, by the way. I don't think he's the only option here. BDD was incredible in the mid lane, had a phenomenal series, completely outpaced Faker, was better in almost every aspect. Dektum completely gapped Gumayushi in terms of the AD carry matchup. Peter was opening up everything on the map, and Cuz was definitely the better jungler here, even if I think that had more to do with Owner than it did with Cuz. But to me, I have to give it to Perfect, not just for the narrative, because obviously the narrative that I've been pushing is that Perfect is a lot better than people are giving him credit for, and I will continue to die on that hill, but he was the best player on the Rift here today. This is not a consolation prize. This is not some sort of pity award or anything like that. Narrative award. He dominated this series. He led the team in kills. He was unbelievably active. He died twice throughout this entire series on Rumble, on Mbessa. He found gigantic ultimates. It felt like a Doran-esque performance from Perfect here on the other side. This guy has crazy high upside, and he plays really well against top-tier top laners. I'm tired of hearing that this guy isn't good enough for you to be able to compete with. If you want to go out there and get Zeus, then yeah, go out there and get Zeus. You're not going to do that in the middle of the season with what you have at your disposal. This guy is like the perfect tier down from those upper tier guys, because on any given day he can still have like an upper tier performance. It's just not going to be consistent, but he's really good, and especially if you get him ahead, this guy can snowball games very quickly. I'm tired of defending Perfect. I hope at some point this narrative stops, because you know I'm losing my mind over here on this channel. I can only say the same things so many times over and over again, but BDD continues to be phenomenal. Again, completely gapped Faker on his Galio in game number 2. Really opened up the map. He was really the creator, I would say, kind of the one who was pushing the game tempo forward to set up for Perfect and Dektum to really take over in terms of their damage. Dektum was way better than Gumayushi. He's so good at Ziggs. He's always been really good at Ziggs, and it's good to see that that has continued. Peter's macro is incredible. The fact that this team ever in a million years thought that Wei was going to be better for them than Peter, like genuinely, I was getting to the point where I was going to write an angry letter to KT management and say that all of you should be fired, because the fact that Peter got benched mid-split, completely justifiable in any capacity. This team was unplayable with Wei in the starting lineup, and Peter opens up everything for this team. Cuz was absolutely the better jungler here as well. Again, a lot of that has to do with Owner playing really poor, but Cuz was, doing a good job capitalizing. He also was very rarely in danger, was super consistent, and set everything up for BDD and Dektum and Perfect to be able to capitalize on. Awesome stuff from KT. I have nothing else left to say. They played phenomenal in this series. And then for T1, I would like to sit here and say that this is a nightmare, but this is classic summer T1. They're going to lose games going into playoffs, and then they're going to do well either in playoffs or at the regional finals and then go to Worlds. I'm not panicking about this T1 team, and I don't think T1 fans should be panicking either. This is a fun win for KT Rolster, but really at the end of the day, this feels more like KT showed up today and T1's going to be fine moving forward more than anything else. Owner was terrible. He's going to get dud of the series for me. Easily the worst player on the Rift. I think KIA deserves some, blame for how he played on the Braum. That flash auto, going wide, I mean, holy, that is nightmare fuel for KIA. That's just one of those everything is going wrong type of moments. I think Faker got completely outpaced in the mid lane. Not really a ton to like about his performance. Doran was the only player on the team that was even trying to do anything. He had a good week overall, but again, Guma was outpaced. T1 just were not on the same page here today. They did not look good, and I think it's going to be fine. They did this at the end of the regular season in spring as well, went into playoffs and made MSI. They're going to do the same thing here. They just have a splitly collapse that happens in the regular season 1 week where they don't look all that good, and it happened to be against Nongshim and KT this week. So hopefully they end up rebounding in week 15. Even if they don't, I'm not going to panic about T1. It's just not, in my DNA. I can't, I know T1. I've seen the scripts too many times at this point, but it is a good win for KT, and I hope this gets the fans to shut up, quite frankly, because they look so good as this group of 5. This group of 5 can make noise at Worlds. I fully believe this can be a top 4 team in the world. They can make the semifinals, and you just have to stick to the process. Don't overcomplicate things and let this group figure things out. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK Week 14 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 14 weeks of action. Basically, everything is locked up going into some of the final weeks of the regular season here, some of the final games of the regular season here, as we know our teams that have guaranteed themselves top 4 and therefore locked themselves for playoffs. Gen.G, Hanwha Life, T1, and KT Rolster are your top 4 seeds. They don't have to go through the play-ins. They are guaranteed into the playoffs, no no matter what. Now, that means that Nongshim at 5th in the Legend group is guaranteed to go into the play-ins. They will have to face the team that comes out 3rd in the Rise group, but we already know one of our play-in matchups. I believe it's locked in that these teams are going to be in this order, but Dplus KIA taking on BNK FearX as the top 2 seeds coming out of Rise group. That's very fun. One of those teams are guaranteed to make playoffs here, which certainly becomes very interesting, which you can see in my power rankings to the right of every single team. Again, I would typically say changes, next to that, but for like the 3rd week in a row, I'm just not making any changes. Not only have there not been a ton of crazy upsets, but honestly, I just don't feel different enough about any of these teams to feel confident moving them around. It's hard to feel terrible about Nongshim, even though they're on an 11 series losing streak, because, they're going up against some of the best teams in the league over and over again. Every single series is one that they should have lost, and so they never really got the chance to prove that they are worse than, BFX or Bro or anything like that. So for now, they're staying at number 6. DK, despite not looking good, stays at number 5 because they also haven't had the chance to prove that they are worse than Nongshim, even though they very well could be. Hell, BFX might be the 5th best team in the league on any given day, and so it just kind of is what it is. It's very difficult to try and project, but right now, really the only interesting thing is who's going to get that 3rd and final spot between Bro and DRX. Next week is going to prove a lot. Right now, Bro are very much in control of that, but they've not looked very good over the course of this week, so we'll see how that breaks down. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below. Very curious to know where you land on all of that stuff, but let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week number 14. Player of the week, obviously, is going to go to Chovy. He was the best player on the Rift this week. He was incredible, especially on the macro-oriented picks. The Galio against Nongshim, the Rise against HLE. Those were really the series that ended up, or the games, I should say, that ended up getting him this player of the series, but the Orianna game's still very good. You can't let Chovy have full control of the map. He's going to get a gigantic CS lead, he's going to have a ton of gold, and he's going to be able to use it to do anything he wants at any point in the game. Gen.G is going to macro you into oblivion if you allow that to happen, and Chovy once again proved that that is the most effective strategy for the top teams in the world. My honorable mentions, Showmaker, the mid laner for Dplus KIA. He was essential towards their success over the course of this week, and honestly, I don't know if this team would be anywhere without him right now. He really is keeping them afloat in a lot of different ways. And then Diablo, the AD carry for FearX, despite the fact that they went 1-1 across this week, I think he played so well in both series that he has to get an honorable mention. I'm still a little bit cautious about what his future looks like. I still think some people are projecting more positively than I am in terms of, oh, he's going to go join KT Rolster next year and become a superstar. I think it's possible, but you never really know. But right now, it's looking really good. So Diablo and Showmaker are my honorable mentions. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Morgan, the top laner for Bro. Terrible week for Morgan. Honestly, not a very good split in a year, really, for Morgan, at least in total. He's been okay, certainly a below average top laner, but I think there could be worse. It's just unfortunate because I know he has kind of a cult following. A lot of people really like him individually as a player, and I just don't know if he's living up to that right now. Krakow, obviously, also in consideration for this, but Morgan, to me, was the weakest player, so Morgan's going to get dud of the week, and Chovy is going to get player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be posting about every single game for the LCK the rest of the year, the end of the regular season, going into playoffs and Worlds qualification, all of that fun stuff. But we also cover all 3 of the other major regions as well. So LTA, North, LEC, and LPL on this channel every single week. We've been covering NACL. The playoffs are, raging full force right now in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell. We're still casting for LPL English. The links to that are in the description. We're casting tonight as this video goes live. So if you're watching this in a couple of hours after this, I will be live for LPL English. You can check out my live cast there or just see how the LPL is going with the links in the description to both the YouTube and the Twitch. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all